A big win for President Trump today as the Supreme Court denies Democrats access to grand jury material from Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, at least for now anyway. The court agreed to hear the administration's appeal of a lower court ruling that the documents be turned over to the House, which likely would not happen until after the 2020 election.
It's a pretty significant win for the president, Julie. The fact is the Democrats were very eager to get their hands on these documents. These are grand jury materials and other materials connected with the Mueller report that have never seen the light of day.
I want to show you a new study on our screen, finding how the networks cover all of this. The networks NBC, ABC, and CBS. Take a look. Spent nearly 25 minutes celebrating the Supreme Court's liberal victories.
Okay, so imagine this scene. You're watching live courtroom coverage. Maybe you've got it streaming on your phone, and suddenly all hell breaks loose. Trump is on his feet. He's screaming at the judge, calling them a radical lunatic, accusing them of bias and corruption. The judge is banging the gavel, demanding order. Trump's lawyers are trying to calm him down, but he's not listening. He just keeps going, getting louder, more aggressive, more out of control. And then the judge has had enough. The order comes down, remove him from the courtroom. Now, and you're watching as Secret Service agents move in, as security surrounds Trump, as he's physically escorted out of the courtroom while still screaming, still disrupting, still refusing to accept what's happening. Can you believe this? A former president being dragged out of a courtroom because he couldn't control himself. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
During evening broadcasts. So there's a message that's being spread across the country by the media, but this is nothing new. But what do you make of it?
Yeah, and look, I mean, in a way, it's unfortunate in that so much of the Supreme Court's docket these days seems to be politicized, with certain networks and others kind of zooming in on the political consequences. And we saw that in the House Democrats' efforts.
This is November 2025, and what we're witnessing is an absolute meltdown. Not just a legal setback, not just a bad day in court, a complete emotional breakdown in front of cameras, in front of the world, in a setting where decorum and respect for the court are absolutely required, and Trump just couldn't do it. He couldn't sit there and let the proceedings happen. He had to make it about him, had to turn it into a spectacle, had to fight the judge, the system, the entire process. And it backfired spectacularly, because judges have power in their courtrooms, absolute power to maintain order. And when you defy that power, when you refuse to follow the rules, there are immediate consequences. And Trump just experienced those consequences in the most public, humiliating way possible. The chaos in that courtroom was unprecedented. Legal experts who practiced for decades say they've never seen anything like it. Court staff scrambling to restore order, security moving in to physically remove a defendant, lawyers being expelled and sanctioned for failing to control their client, a lengthy recess being called because the proceedings couldn't continue, and all of it captured on camera, all of it witnessed by reporters, observers, and eventually the entire world as the footage went viral. This isn't something that happens in American courtrooms. Defendants don't scream at judges. They don't get physically removed. They don't cause complete breakdowns of judicial proceedings. But Trump did, and the fallout is massive. Let's rewind and understand what led to this explosion. Because Trump didn't just walk into court planning to have a meltdown. There was a buildup. The hearing was pivotal. Major decisions were being made about evidence, about trial procedures, about sanctions and penalties. And things were not going Trump's way. The judge was ruling against him repeatedly, denying motions, allowing evidence Trump wanted excluded, making it clear that this trial was going to proceed and Trump was going to have to face the charges without the protections he was seeking. And with each ruling, you could see Trump getting more agitated, more frustrated, more angry. His lawyers were whispering to him, trying to keep him calm, but it wasn't working. Then came the interruptions. Trump started talking during the proceedings, not asking permission to speak, just interrupting, making comments, questioning the judge's rulings in real time. And the judge warned him multiple times, "Sir, you need to be quiet. Sir, your lawyers will speak for you. Sir, if you continue to interrupt, there will be consequences." But Trump didn't care. He kept going, kept interrupting, kept making it clear he didn't respect the court's authority. And that's when things escalated, because judges don't tolerate that kind of behavior from anyone. It doesn't matter if you're a former president or a regular citizen. In a courtroom, the judge is in charge, and if you can't follow the rules, you're going to be removed. The final straw came when Trump stood up right in the middle of the proceedings, just stood up and started screaming. Not raising his voice, screaming, calling the judge a radical lunatic, accusing them of running a rigged trial, claiming the whole thing was political persecution, and refusing to sit down when ordered. That's when the judge issued the explosive order, remove the defendant from the courtroom immediately, and chaos erupted. Secret Service had to intervene because they're responsible for Trump's security. Court security was moving in. Trump's lawyers were trying to physically get him to sit down and stop, but Trump was out of control. He kept screaming even as he was being escorted out, kept disrupting even as the courtroom descended into complete chaos. And here's the thing that makes this even more stunning. The judge didn't just remove Trump. The judge also expelled and sanctioned his legal team, held them responsible for failing to control their client, for enabling his behavior by not properly preparing him for court, for not doing their duty as officers of the court to maintain decorum and respect for the judicial process. Trump's lawyers were told to leave the courtroom. Warnings were issued that if they couldn't control their client, they faced contempt charges themselves. This is a judge drawing a hard line and saying, everyone in this courtroom is going to follow the rules or face immediate consequences, no exceptions. Not for former presidents, not for high-priced lawyers, nobody. The public reaction has been intense because this was witnessed, cameras captured it, reporters wrote about it in real time, and the footage spread everywhere. Social media exploded with clips of Trump being removed, legal analysts doing emergency breakdowns of what just happened, political commentators discussing what this means for Trump's legal strategy and his public image. Because this isn't just a legal problem, this is a political disaster. This is the image of Trump completely losing control, unable to handle the pressure of being held accountable, melting down in public in the most humiliating way possible. And that image is what people will remember, not the legal arguments, not the procedural issues, the screaming, the removal, the complete loss of composure. This is the story. A former president having a public meltdown so severe that he had to be physically removed from a courtroom. And we're going to break down exactly what happened, what the judge ordered, and what this means for his future. Let's get into it. All right, so let's get into the details of what actually happened in that courtroom. Because to understand why this meltdown was so significant, you need to understand the context, the buildup, and just how far Trump went in defying the judge's authority. This hearing on November 11, 2025, was supposed to be a standard pretrial proceeding. Motions were being argued. The judge was making rulings on what evidence would be allowed at trial, what witnesses could testify, what legal arguments each side could make. Standard stuff. Happens in every major trial. But nothing about this was going to be standard once Trump showed up. From the moment the hearing started, Trump was agitated. You could see it in his body language, the way he was shifting in his seat, the way he was leaning over to whisper angrily to his lawyers, the way he was reacting visibly to every ruling the judge made against him, and the rulings were going against him. The judge was allowing evidence Trump's team wanted to exclude, evidence of his conversations with advisors about overturning the election, evidence of his knowledge that fraud claims were false, evidence of his direct involvement in planning fake elector schemes. All of it was being allowed, and with each ruling, Trump got more frustrated, more angry, more unable to contain himself. The first interruptions were relatively minor. Trump would mutter something, make a comment loud enough for people nearby to hear, but not quite disrupting the whole courtroom. The judge would pause, look at him, and continue, but then the interruptions got louder. Trump started speaking over his own lawyers when they were making arguments, started interjecting when the prosecution was speaking, and the judge had to address it. The judge said, "Mr. Trump, you need to remain quiet. Your attorneys will speak for you. That's how courtroom proceedings work. You'll have your chance to testify if you choose. But right now, you need to be silent." Clear warning, polite but firm. Anyone else would have taken the hint and complied, but Trump didn't. He kept going, and the next interruption was even worse. The prosecution was presenting evidence, showing documents that proved Trump knew he lost the election, and Trump just started talking, loudly. "This is rigged. This is a witch hunt. You're not allowing my evidence, but you're allowing theirs." The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Trump, I'm warning you. If you continue to interrupt these proceedings, I will hold you in contempt. Your lawyers can object if they believe evidence is being improperly admitted, but you personally cannot speak out of turn. This is your final warning." But then came the ruling that set him off completely. The judge decided to allow testimony from a former Trump aide who had cooperated with prosecutors. This aide had firsthand knowledge of Trump's conversations about the fake elector scheme, had been in meetings where Trump discussed ways to overturn the election, and Trump's team had filed motions to exclude this testimony, arguing it was hearsay or privileged or unreliable. But the judge ruled that the testimony was admissible, that it was firsthand knowledge, not hearsay, that privilege didn't apply because the conversations were in furtherance of a crime, that the witness was credible and their testimony was relevant. Ruling denied. The testimony comes in, and that's when Trump lost it. He stood up, right there in the middle of the courtroom, just stood up while the judge was still speaking, and he started screaming, not raising his voice in objection, screaming, "You're a radical lunatic. This is a rigged trial. You're corrupt. You're biased. You're working with them to destroy me. This whole thing is a sham." And the courtroom just froze. Because this doesn't happen. Defendants don't stand up and scream at judges. It's such a fundamental violation of courtroom protocol that for a moment everyone was too stunned to react. The judge, the lawyers, the security, everyone just stared in disbelief. But the judge recovered quickly. "Sit down, Mr. Trump. Sit down immediately." And when Trump didn't comply, when he just kept screaming, the judge issued the order, "Bailiff, remove the defendant from the courtroom now." And that's when the chaos really started. Because removing Trump from a courtroom isn't like removing a regular defendant. Trump has Secret Service protection, so the Secret Service agents had to coordinate with court security. They moved toward Trump, trying to get him to leave voluntarily. But Trump wasn't going voluntarily. He was still screaming, still accusing the judge of corruption, still refusing to accept what was happening. So they had to physically guide him out. Not dragging him, exactly, but definitely using physical contact to move him toward the door while he continued to disrupt. And Trump kept screaming the whole way. Even as he was being escorted out of the courtroom, he was yelling back at the judge, "This is political persecution. The American people see what you're doing. You're going to pay for this." Just completely out of control, completely unable to stop himself, even though he had to know this was being recorded, being witnessed, going to be all over the news within minutes. But he couldn't stop. The anger, the frustration, the inability to accept that he doesn't control everything, it all just poured out in this public meltdown. And the whole world got to watch it happen. Once Trump was removed, you'd think the hearing would resume, but the judge wasn't done, because Trump's lawyers were still sitting there, and the judge turned to them. And what the judge said next was just as explosive as the removal order. "I am holding Trump's legal team partially responsible for this outburst. You had a duty to prepare your client for these proceedings, to explain to him how courtroom decorum works, to ensure he understood that he cannot simply interrupt and disrupt whenever he disagrees with a ruling. You have failed in that duty, and your failure has turned these proceedings into a circus. So I'm sanctioning all of you, financial penalties, and I'm ordering you to leave this courtroom as well. You're expelled from today's proceedings." The lawyers tried to object, tried to argue that they couldn't control Trump's behavior, that he's an adult who makes his own decisions, but the judge shut that down. "You are officers of this court. You have ethical obligations. One of those obligations is to ensure your client conducts himself appropriately during proceedings. If you cannot fulfill that obligation, then you cannot represent him in my courtroom. Now leave." And Trump's legal team had no choice but to gather their materials and walk out, sanctioned and expelled in the most public humiliation possible for lawyers. The courtroom then went into recess because there was no way to continue with Trump and his lawyers gone. Court staff had to restore order. The judge needed time to decide how to proceed, and everyone needed a moment to process what had just happened, because this was unprecedented. In the history of American jurisprudence, there's no comparable incident of a former president being physically removed from a courtroom for contemptuous behavior. When the hearing reconvened after the recess, the judge issued additional warnings, made it clear that tomorrow, when proceedings resume, Trump would be required to appear, but would be removed again at the first sign of disruption, that his lawyers needed to have a serious conversation with him about courtroom conduct, or they'd be replaced by court-appointed attorneys, that any further outbursts would result in immediate contempt charges with possible jail time. The judge was drawing the hardest possible line, saying in the clearest terms, "This is my courtroom, I am in charge, and everyone will follow the rules or face severe consequences." Legal experts watching this unfold were stunned. Veteran trial lawyers saying they'd never seen anything like it in decades of practice. Constitutional scholars debating whether a judge can actually jail a former president for contempt, what that would look like logistically with Secret Service protection. But the consensus was clear. Trump had crossed a line that no defendant can cross, and the judge responded appropriately by removing him and issuing severe sanctions. The experts were saying this is what happens when someone refuses to accept that courtroom rules apply to them. The system has mechanisms to enforce those rules, and we just watched them being deployed. The political fallout was immediate. Trump's opponents seized on the footage of him being removed, using it in ads and statements to argue he's unfit for office, unable to control himself, dangerous, and unhinged. Trump supporters claimed he was being persecuted, that the judge was biased, that the removal was political theater designed to humiliate him, but even some Republicans were uncomfortable with what they saw because there's no good way to spin a video of someone screaming at a judge and being physically removed from a courtroom. It looks bad, it looks unstable, it looks like someone who can't handle pressure or follow rules, and this affects Trump's legal strategy going forward, because if he can't control himself in court, how can he possibly testify in his own defense? His lawyers probably wanted to keep him off the witness stand anyway. But now they have visual evidence that Trump can't maintain composure under pressure. Any prosecutor would use that meltdown to argue Trump shouldn't testify, And if he does, they use it to show the jury that he's volatile, unstable, unable to control his emotions when faced with accountability. The judge's actions also send a message to other courts handling Trump cases that you can enforce rules even against a former president, that you can remove him from the courtroom if necessary, that you can sanction his lawyers if they enable bad behavior, that judicial authority is real and enforceable regardless of who the defendant is. Other judges who might have been hesitant to take strong action against Trump now have a precedent. They've seen it done. They know it's possible, and that emboldens them to maintain control of their own courtrooms. Okay, let's break down what this courtroom meltdown actually means, because we've covered what happened and the immediate chaos it caused. Now we need to understand the implications and what happens next. Point 1. Trump's behavior proves he can't handle accountability. The meltdown wasn't a calculated strategy. It wasn't a performance for his base. It was a genuine loss of control. Someone who spent his entire life getting his way, avoiding consequences, being able to bulldoze through problems, suddenly faced with a situation where none of that works, where a judge has absolute authority and Trump's wealth, power, and status don't matter, and he couldn't handle it. He broke down, started screaming like a child having a tantrum, got himself physically removed from the courtroom. That shows someone who is psychologically unable to accept accountability, who can't maintain composure when faced with real consequences, and that has massive implications both legally and politically. Point 2. The judge's response shows the system can enforce rules even against powerful defendants. For years, there's been this question of whether Trump is above the law, whether his power and influence mean rules don't apply to him. Well, we got our answer in that courtroom. The judge didn't hesitate, didn't give special treatment, didn't worry about political fallout, just enforced the rules the same way they would for any defendant who disrupted proceedings. Remove him, sanction his lawyers, make clear that further violations mean immediate consequences, including possible jail time. That's the rule of law in action. That's a judge saying, I don't care who you are. In my courtroom, you follow my rules or you face the consequences. And that's exactly how it should work in a functioning democracy. Point 3. This destroys Trump's ability to testify in his own defense. Defense attorneys often want their clients to testify. It humanizes them, lets them tell their side of the story, but it's also risky because prosecutors can cross-examine and potentially expose lies or inconsistencies. Trump's lawyers were probably already planning to keep him off the stand because he can't control himself or stick to answers that help his case. But now it's impossible because prosecutors would use the courtroom meltdown against him. They'd show the jury footage of Trump screaming and being removed. They'd argue this is who he really is, someone who can't control himself, who refuses to accept reality, and that would destroy his credibility with the jury. So the meltdown has effectively eliminated Trump's ability to testify, which limits his defense options significantly. Point 4. The political damage is severe and lasting. We have video of a former president screaming at a judge and being physically removed from a courtroom. That's going to be replayed forever, in campaign ads, in news coverage, in history documentaries. It's an image that defines Trump in this moment, shows him completely out of control, unable to handle the pressure of legal accountability, melting down in public. That's devastating politically. Even his supporters have to be uncomfortable watching it. Even people who agree with his policies have to wonder if this is someone who should have power. The video answers those questions, and the answers are not good. So what happens next? Trump has to appear in court for future hearings and eventually for trial. The judge has made clear that disruptions will not be tolerated. So Trump faces a choice. Either he controls himself and sits through proceedings quietly, or he melts down again and faces contempt charges with possible jail time. If he controls himself, he has to sit there and watch as evidence against him is presented, as witnesses testify about his crimes, as prosecutors build their case. That's going to be psychologically difficult for someone who can't accept accountability. The pressure might cause another breakdown, but if he disrupts again, the consequences will be severe. Contempt charges with jail time are a real possibility. If Trump has another outburst, the judge can hold him in contempt and order him jailed. That creates an unprecedented situation. How do you jail a former president with Secret Service protection? Where does he go? What security measures are needed? These are questions without clear answers because it's never happened before, but the judge has the authority to do it, and after the meltdown we witnessed, the judge might not hesitate if Trump acts up again. Trump's legal team will be replaced if they can't control him. The judge made that clear. The lawyers were sanctioned and expelled. They were told to get Trump under control or face replacement. So Trump's attorneys are in an impossible position. They have to somehow convince Trump to behave in court, to sit quietly, to follow the rules, but Trump doesn't take direction well. He doesn't listen to advice he doesn't like, so his lawyers are probably having desperate conversations right now about how to keep him from destroying his own defense. And if they fail, if Trump melts down again, the judge will replace them with court-appointed attorneys which would be humiliating and would rob Trump of his chosen representation. The trial itself will proceed regardless of Trump's behavior. The judge made that clear too. Trump can be removed from the courtroom, but the trial continues. Evidence will be presented. Witnesses will testify. The jury will deliberate. Trump's presence isn't required for every moment of the trial. So if he can't control himself, he can sit in a holding cell and watch on video while his trial proceeds without him physically present. That's within the judge's authority, and it means Trump can't derail the trial through disruption. He can only hurt his own case and face additional consequences. Public perception has shifted significantly, because one thing is seeing Trump as a fighter, someone who challenges the system and refuses to back down. That's his political brand. But it's another thing entirely to see him completely losing control, screaming, being physically removed, looking unhinged and unstable. That's not strength, that's weakness. That's someone cracking under pressure. And voters, even Trump supporters, have to be questioning whether this is someone fit for leadership. The meltdown changed how people see him, made him look small and weak and unable to handle adversity. And that's politically devastating. The precedent affects all Trump's legal cases. He's facing trials in multiple jurisdictions, and judges in those cases are watching what happened. They're seeing that you can enforce courtroom rules against Trump, that you can remove him if necessary, that you can sanction his lawyers, that you can threaten contempt charges, and that emboldens them to maintain control of their own courtrooms. So Trump can expect less tolerance for disruption going forward, more judges willing to enforce rules strictly, less room to use chaos as a defense strategy. Look, what we witnessed was historic and deeply revealing. A former president so unable to accept accountability that he had a public meltdown in court. A judge so committed to the rule of law that they removed him without hesitation. A legal system proving that it can enforce its rules even against the most powerful defendants. That's significant. That matters for democracy. Because if Trump could disrupt proceedings without consequences, if judges were too afraid to enforce rules against him, then we wouldn't really have a justice system. We'd have a system where power determines outcomes. But that's not what happened. The system worked, the rules were enforced, and Trump faced immediate consequences for his behavior. Does this mean Trump will be convicted? Not necessarily. He still gets a trial, still gets to present a defense. The jury still has to find him guilty, beyond reasonable doubt, but his chances got much worse because of this meltdown. He hurt his own case, made himself look unstable and guilty and unable to control himself. So yes, this makes conviction more likely. This is what happens when someone who's never faced real accountability suddenly has to. They can't handle it. They break down, and we all got to watch it happen. Stay tuned, because if Trump can't control himself, we might see even more dramatic scenes before it's over. This story is just beginning.